So, to recap from the morning session, welcome. I hope that everything was okay, by the way, when you went to lunch. I heard that it was delicious. The first thing is about attention and mindfulness, because I need to draw a very straight line with that, because there's been so much made in the literature and the way it's presented, and also cross-culturally, it's not always understood, the context in which the term is used. And I'm very specific about meaningful, that thinking mind, that left hemisphere, is overrated, and it creates a virtual reality headset of thought and thinking. So there's this meditation practice. There was this gentleman, his name was Tim Canton, and he died about 3 years ago, but he was the one. There's this, for those, because I grew up, honestly, very pre-refuge recovery, with all the normal struggles of being an atheist, and being a 12-step fellowship. But this guy, Tim Canton, he wrote Step 11, and he also wrote a book. He passed away, like I said, several years ago, but one of the books that he wrote it's called The Mindful Addict. But what he functionally says is, like the actual meditation practice in Step 11 that he wrote for the NA basic text, Narcotics Anonymous basic text, is you're basically watching the thoughts arise. You're not pushing, you're not pulling, you're not interrogating, you're not analyzing, and you just watch the thoughts die a natural death. So in doing that, I would invite you to imagine yourself, you're sitting on the beach, and you're sitting there and you're watching the waves. And if you've had that experience, you know the only thing that you can do is watch the wave. So the wave comes up, you can maybe make a comment about the wave, but functionally, even your commentary will do nothing to alter or change the nature of the wave. So taking one step back, but from the Zen perspective, the question could be, who or what is that is watching the thoughts come and go, and perhaps even speak? Like if you sit there long enough in Zazen or silent meditation, and you're seeing the thoughts, and they're like kind of like in this commentary, eventually you'll see, if you wait long enough, two aspects of self, two parts, if you're using like kind of like the internal family system vernacular, and they're actually in conversation with each other. And we're just watching it. And we're not a part of the conversation. What is that? Other than the awareness. And so this is like the part which a lot of people may not be aware of, because we talk about mind so much, but awareness is located to the body. And when the body drops out, including like dead, awareness continues. It's consciousness. It's just a part of oceanic nature of consciousness. And that is non-dual. So there are a billion trillion waves. We call them people. These people who have these personalities are attached to an infinite ocean. The ocean is not particularly disturbed by the 10 trillion waves, that are there. But we need to understand, or it can be helpful to understand, that there's something that's watching. and that which is watching is the authentic you, that is the awareness, and is not the mind, but uses attention to kind of like go back and forth and communicate back to awareness. And that's just a part of the practice. So that's really simple. So like if we said right now, you're just going to observe thought. So you link in 4 postures. There's the physical posture. And from the Tibetan aspect and proper Zen aspect, left hand is on the bottom. The left hand is connected to the right hemisphere. So this is your wisdom nature. Your right palm is in the left. So the wisdom holds the method. You join the thumbs together in the mudra. And by the way, this mudra, they call it the cosmic mudra, but this symbolizes the womb that each of us came through to take up a body. And everything inside the space is like the thoughts. And so just breathe, and you're breathing from your soft belly. And so a breath cycle is pause briefly at the bottom, and then inhalation. Pause at the top, and from that vantage point, we're simply observing what mind is doing, so that we understand that we are not the thoughts. We are like the screen, that it is what it is, but the thoughts are projected on the screen of awareness. And that alone can begin a change in relationship with awareness. So that's one of the things that I wanted to come back to, that is like super important, that to try to focus a little time, take it for a test drive, this relationship that we're having with attention, and learn how to direct it. The other piece that I wanted to recap is, and Bree brought this up because there's a lot of information that's being downloaded. Like there's this Japanese word, it's called denshin. And denshin means transmission of an experience. So there's a lot that is being offered because it's just necessary. And I'm actively attempting to break some myths. That's a part of the practice. But that said, this is not an Olympic sport. It's not about getting it right or getting it wrong. It's a practice, not an event. It's about learning different aspects to practice with, and maybe give us permission to free ourselves from the bias. And so the ultimate punchline to like what Bree was wanting me to come back to, and this is very strange, but I'm just going to say it straight ahead. There is no possibility whatsoever that you are ever going to be enlightened. It ain't gonna happen, because you already are. The actual practice is simply to notice. That's it. Just to notice. You're already complete. There's not a 2.0 or a 3.0 version of you. So there's this thing that I sometimes refer to is, I call it Buddha DNA. So DNA of universal loving presence. It's almost like a trait, or actually this is exactly like a trait. So I'm extremely left-handed, but the truth is I can use my right hand. Calligraphy of Chinese and Japanese, the characters are actually designed to be done right-handed. They're not supposed to do it with the left hand. And as a matter of fact, so much so the characters will not come out by the technical Japanese Chinese feed that they're supposed to look. So there's a thing about that. So that said, so when I'm doing calligraphy, I can actually use my right hand. But I'm extremely left-handed, so I'm operating against my natural trait. But for the temporary period of time, I make a commitment to just use my right hand, and I can do it. So this is the same thing as what some might describe as a character default or a character defect or negative aspects of ourselves. Like, how can I do these terrible things? Well, you were never divorced from your Buddha DNA, your universal loving presence. You just you made an active choice of some sort, usually driven by anxiety, to operate against it because there was some survival impulse related to it. So, as much as we would like to condemn all the terrible things that we have ever done in our life, there was an aspect, not you, but there was an aspect of yourself that was driving the car at the time that thought that was a good turn, that it was going to preserve you. Might have been ugly, might have been muddy, but somewhere in there, its actual intention was not destructive. It was actually positive. And it doesn't look that way to our moral system, but to it did. And we could offer ourselves a little mercy or forgiveness around those mistakes that we've had. Because, like I said, it's hard for some people to come to the reality because we like to think that we're adults and we're making all the decisions and making all the choices in our life. But it's actually been proven at Stanford University by neuroscientists that when an opportunity for a choice is made to have this or that, they can actually show you in a brain scan that the choice was made normally about 2 milliseconds or 3 milliseconds before the person thinks they actually made the choice. And so what the neocortex was actually doing was rationalizing the choice. And that's called confabulation in psychology, by the way. When something happens, like you're operating in a blackout, and then to reduce anxiety, your brain just naturally, your neocortex makes up a story about what it assumes happened so that you don't freak out or panic, and so that you can go on. So I would say that. So I wanted to cover those points, and then I want to get back into to this last point, and then lead into the next part of the discussion. And with that, let's make all this magic work. Thanks to John. Okay, so just want to touch into this part briefly because this is the fourth aspect of the Fourfold Path Naga. So in Zazen, it is Zazen as life itself. So this is the entire practice. You are truly enlightened. I'm not saying that as a matter of hyperbole. A lot of people don't believe it, but that which doesn't believe it, honestly, that's just mine. Because if you were enlightened, then it has a sense that it would be out of a job. So suffering ends when the way of living changes. So this kind of leads into CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. Behavior changes thinking, like where we might doubt ourselves. If you just go through the motions and make effort, you can change. But that said, the inner Jedi for the Eightfold Path is the reason why it doesn't work out, because, even consider this. The first part of the Eightfold Path is clear or sincere or right or appropriate or healthy or non-toxic understanding. How could it be possible that you could ever start out that way? Because how else did we get here? So I mentioned this one day to Lodo Gurung Rinpoche, and he said, "Oh, Seiho, what a great question, because it's a lock and key method. It doesn't like in Tibetan practices and traditions. I trained with him for 3 years under Lodo Gurung Rinpoche and Khentrumpa Rinpoche. empowerments. And empowerments are like, you have to go through the process because they want to make sure, or they're doing their best that they can to make sure that the teaching or the practice is not corrupted for selfish reasons. So what happens is, so what Little Girl Rinpoche said, instead of doing the Eightfold Path 1 to 8, do it 8 to 1 and see what happens. And as soon as he said it, oh my God, start with concentration and then go into the presence meditation or alertness, attentfulness is the thing. And then you go back into effort and energy. Then you go into livelihood. We'll be jumping into the next part. And then action and engagement, communication and community, intention, and then understand. Like you'll naturally just arrive at the understanding so if you just reverse it. It was so simple, but it was there the whole time. It was just perspective. It was so habitual because they labeled it number 1. Well, that must be the first thing that you do. And he said, you're just being a trained parent at that point. And this is part of what the direct teaching is. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, so now part 2. So this is actually unfolding the self. And this is, I kind of use a metaphor that is kind of helpful and useful, but it's not precisely aligned, which is like kind of like 12 steps to doing this. And so in that, so unfolding the way, step 1 is the recognition. And so we acknowledge that we live with an unhealthy, fear-shaped relationship with the self. And this distorted relationship because we're looking through the lens of thought. And so this is like me, if I'm not wearing my glasses, it's just a bunch of distortion. I could never drive safely at night if I wasn't wearing glasses. And so if I'm committed to that distorted viewpoint, which are the thoughts that we're looking through experience, because remember, like functionally, human beings are brains in a vat. So the only outward sensory points I have is ears, eyes, nose, sense of taste, spatially. So that's it. So everything is actually being interpreted. And as a matter of fact, this is one of my funny things that have to bear recognition. Like if we're looking around, can someone describe some of the colors that you're seeing in this room, physically?
A lot of brown.
Huh?
So we got a lot of brown.
That's it? Red fire extinguisher?
We got a lot of black.
Well, it's Seattle, so you got that's just the basic uniform of Seattle. Right, so there's a lot about black. Now, question, where are you seeing the color? Where are you seeing the color?
Where there's light.
You're seeing it from the interior of your mind. Color is not seen outwardly. What happens is there's data that's processed. It goes in through the eye, and it's actually processed. And once it's inside the mind, the color is added from the inside. That's how powerful and sophisticated the mind is, and we're committed to our color schemas, the way things look, the shape, the size, and the sound. So that's it. So once you go beyond the anxiety into the early wounding, we have to admit, like some people have a hard time admitting that they've been harmed, that they have been wounded. And if we can't admit that it happened, then that can be problematic. And trigger alert, when I was a kid, I was assaulted sexually by a family member, and I said something to my mom, and she said, oh, well, that happened to me when I was a child, and I just learned to get over it. So she was, and my mom was a therapist, but she was saying stuff those feelings. So if we can't admit and own what actually happened, how is there any authenticity or integrity in the relationship? Especially those people who are charged with the responsibility of working at, you don't have to be perfect at this, but like, a guide, a life guide, and that's called parenting. And then this conditioned belief, so the things that we were kind of indoctrinated into, like be a good person, and don't do this, and don't do that, and share your toys, and yada, yada, yada. So these influences are a manageable life and a color of how we experience and interpret reality. So the question could always be, here's a super simple question from a meditation process in step one in terms of recognition. Is this my experience, or is this the story that I'm telling myself about the reality of the experience? Is it real or is it memories? That's the first thing. The second thing is to allow for an opening, open awareness, to have a feel. The reason why openness is important because, and this is a right hemisphere function, so this is literally, if I was sitting in a meditation process, I would be directing my attention to the right hemisphere, literally, and just seeing like a big open space, like the universe itself, and how the universe is this big ring and everything is just inside and a part of it. And as a matter of fact, one of the people that I still sponsor back in Maryland, because there's this thing in 12-step where you gotta get a higher power. I said, what's your higher power? And he said, it's the universe. And I said, what made you pick that? And he said, because everything is in and nothing else falls out. I'm like, that's so beautiful. That was a wonderful way. And frankly, that's how I got through the Sky Daddy patriarchy. So I like to make that joke. That's what my kid says, so it's not me, so don't come hunt me down on Facebook or something for my atrocities. So that said, values, awareness, breath, and this is one of the things in the Zen world that I really try to draw a lot of attention to is breathing. Is not the shallow breathing from the upper body, which actually increases anxiety and panic, but breathing that's coming from the soft belly, the hara, the dantian, so that it actually will decrease cortisol output, creates a sense of harmony with the self, and a sense of restfulness that allows for clarity, is so that we have an opportunity to recognize our authentic or our Buddha DNA, this DNA of universal loving presence. In step 3, this is about a commitment, and the commitment is to nothing other than our values. So what are my values? Well, we have to self-select that. So, and this goes beyond reliance on the knee-jerk, like something happens and I just react. Well, what would happen, like there's this thing at the monastery that we use, and it's part of traditional practice among Japanese. It's called keisaku. And keisaku is the waking stick. And so in using the waking stick, and you have to ask for it in the United States, by the way. So it's not like people beating people with sticks. So please don't take that away. But when you hear the keisaku stick, they're hitting it on acupressure points, and it drives energy down into the bottom of the spine, and it produces a sensation of wakefulness. So that's why they use a keisaku stick. It's never punishment. It's actually just energy alignment. And so that's it. But when people hear the keisaku, sometimes you'll actually see people, especially when I'm jiki-jitsu and running the sit, you'll see people like jerk or whatever. But it's when the keisaku hits that you remain still, you're not reacting, you're able to manage you have responses rather than reactions. So when somebody says something unpleasant, do you instantly go into a negative facial structure, or can you just maintain posture and just be like an empty bowl or cup and just receive what's said or done without attributing harm, shame, blame, unless there's real violence or something going on. But it's just in general, somebody says something, even that it's difficult to hear, like one of the things that I needed to say to somebody a long time ago was, I'm in relationship with you, but I'm not honestly sure how to love you. And that was a difficult thing to say. I had a lot of anxiety. I was terrified. And they didn't respond favorably. And I said, but I'll sit here with you. But I'm just saying, I don't know how. Because if I have to say I love you 52,000 times a day, that's not it. It's like, to me, I don't want to be performative. Like, love is a verb, it's not a noun. It's how we show up and what we do day to day, not necessarily based on, words per minute. And so to stay aligned, to have integrity, those deeper values, which is goodwill, compassion, loving kindness, friendliness, and staying aligned to our values and not getting away from it, and allowing for that authenticity and integrity, which, by the way, some people use that as a definition for enlightenment. But how committed are you to your values? And can we understand that when we objectively run from our values, which is step 4, is knowing what your values are, and notice how, in some way, shape, or form, it's always, if we're honest, in my experience, this is a philosophical, there's always the thread, if we look or notice closely enough, it's always anxiety that drives us out of our value system and into these, sometimes these unhealthy coping strategies like my Swedish fish. So that said, and that's also belief shaping that this negative sense of self or dehydrated sense of self. So examine how patterns can distort the relationship with our attention. So what I actually mean by this is, are you in context with what's going on? Are you getting entangled in the content? So like imagine if you had to, like a lot of times when people are looking at how they get misaligned from their value system, they're writing down all the stories. And I'm like, okay, so you got it out on paper, you see the stories, you might be able to pick up some patterns on that. But can you shift into step 5, which is noticing the nature? What's the actual tendency that leads you into that? And the tendency is that if we're looking at all of our unhappy experiences and then what some of our reactions have been, ways that we kind of showed up short, that if we looked into that, what we would notice is that what actually the active point of separation wasn't the so-called character defect or the negative self-trait, but what was actually going on was it was anxiety, and it got a hold of our actions. And this is where I refer to the scenario as we can become meat puppets. And so once we become a meat puppet to anxiety, we're in a contracted state. So we start doing a lot of things that we may not actually want to do. Like how many people enjoy being depressed and mopey? No, okay, well, John's that one. So John is aligned with Krishna Das. Krishna Das likes to tell stories like, people would come to me and say, hey, Krishna Das, why are you being mopey? And he would literally say to them, I just enjoy moping. It's my thing that I've always done my entire life. And so when we understand that that's the aspect of self, and he could admit it and identify it, he actually was able to change the nature of that relationship. It didn't mean, and it doesn't mean, like if you ever get to see Krishna Das these days, he'll say, the moping is still there, but my relationship with the moping has changed a lot. And he says, actually, it's kind of healthy. I can recognize it, I can see it, understand that aspect of myself, but I don't turn myself into the mope, or the moper, as he likes to call himself. So that says, so John, there you are. So understand of how this fear and the shame and the trauma and the role that they play. And this is another thing too that I want to invite into, speaking our truth. To pretend that our trauma or that our suffering or the actual content didn't happen is never healthy. That's actually called spiritual bypassing. So spiritual practice is not to bypass and levitate our way through things. It's to be in the muck and mud, and this is where the Zen part that we use at Choboji, because I'd never heard this before, but Genjo Roshi, and what we learned there was to use this as a part of our lexicon of communication, is to compost our suffering. And there was even an argument one time, going deeper into this, where Genjo Roshi gave a particular Dharma talk where he says, so we build this cocoon around us, and it's like kind of like our shield and our protection, and we want to break through and we want to get out of this cocoon. And he says, but that's terribly unhealthy. And he said, because consider how much time, energy, and effort that we put in our life into putting up that wall, that cocoon of protection around us. And so what practice can be is taking those pieces of the cocoon, composting them, and using them as a fuel source, as a part of our healing and our unfolding and our transformation. And so that healing is not transactional. So what we want to do is compost those thought bubbles, those experiences, the suffering, the trauma, so that we're not negating our own experience, because to negate one's experience is not healthy. Which also can bring me to a point about, there's a story about, how much time do I have to read?
You're good. 1:30 right now.
Okay, so the time is, okay.
2 o'clock.
Oh, so the end time is 2 o'clock? Perfect. Okay, so there's this lovely story that I want to tell, and it's usually told in indigenous tribal culture, and it's about the white wolf and the black wolf. And so there's a grandfather who's talking to his grandson in indigenous tribal culture, and he talks about the two wolves inside of us. So there's the survival mind versus this higher functioning mind. So the white wolf is portrayed as the strong, the healthy wolf. The black wolf is the survival mind, that unpredictable aspect of self, what you might call as character defaults, character defect, negative sense of self. And so he says, and the struggle is going on with all of us, and we have to work at this. But if we don't deal with that inner struggle, we're not going to be healthy. And so the child asks the grandfather, well, which wolf ends up winning? And so the way that the story traditionally ends is, it's the wolf that you feed. Now, it turns out that that is not how the story is actually told in indigenous tribal culture. Because we like our happy narratives, and they lived happily ever after. So, but in actual indigenous tribal culture, I have the benefit of also being, my grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee. The way Dame described the story to me is that you're supposed to feed both wolves because you need them both. You need the dark aspects or the shadow self, and you need the light self. And if you don't feed both wolves, then what happens is when you really need like that fierce tenacity to get through a situation, that aspect of self won't trust you, and so it won't be accessible, in our psyche. So this would, in like, if you're into Jungian psychology, this would be, instead of running from your internal archetypes, you would turn towards, and embrace those archetypes, so that you have a relationship with it, and so it doesn't feel awkward, and so so that there's real presence. So. There have been experiences in my life, like for example, when my daughter, who's 30 years old now, she's an addict, she's currently in recovery. She was in a very severe car crash and almost died. And what was there was that shadow side, it was the wolf. And what the wolf wanted to do, because her boyfriend, who was driving the car that was flipped 6 times at 104 miles an hour, where she almost died, he was out in the parking lot, and I was going to harm him. Fortunately, and strangely, at that exact moment, my sponsor strangely called me, mystical connection. And my sponsor said, you don't have your values permission to do that. And I said, but the rage is here. And she said, of course it's here. but you could respond rather than react to it. In this moment, you have choice. You have agency. But I had so much anxiety about what was going on with my child and her bleeding out of her ear and all the things, I had to work extra hard, but the accessibility was there, and I didn't cause harm to that person. As a matter of fact, I turned around on my heels, I just went back, and they got my daughter on the medevac helicopter, and I drove to Wilmington, Delaware, and they saved her life. But that's an example. So if I didn't have that connection with that shadow aspect of self, it wouldn't have been there. Does that make sense? Thank you. So that said, step 6 is allowing for a new way. So 2 and 6 are actively connected together, so we became entirely ready to stop fighting our authentic nature. And so a lot of times, and this is a kind of funny question, so what is our authentic nature? So this is, this higher level function that can become expansive is, the question is, our authentic nature is love, and it's our values that are the expressions of that love. And so the power that we gain in relationship in this particular step is, what are your values? How do you identify your values? How do you define your values? So like, for example, one time in particular, I was saying to one of my mentors, I'm so unhappy, and I was like, why? And I was like, I'm just so unhappy. I can't believe how unhappy I am. And then my mentor asked me, what's your definition of happiness? And I choked because I realized that I did not have an active definition for happiness. It was just like this idea in my head that I wasn't happy, and I was pissed about it. And there was a part of myself that was pissed about this thing. And so I said, so what do I do? And this particular mentor, her name was Ruth, and she was in Al-Anon. She says, what if you decided what your definition of happiness was? And I said, I'm allowed to do that? And she said, who's gonna know? It's in your head. Are you kidding? And I said, well, I really don't have an idea. So she said, well, it sounds like the way you describe happiness, and this is the benefit of a mentor, having a different perspective than we might have, that not everything is on the shelf because I'm in that contracted state, because running around saying I'm unhappy, that means I'm in a contracted state and also leaving information out. So what she invited me into was, what if friendliness? It sounds a lot like friendliness is your definition of happiness. I'm like, oh, that's good. That sounds like me. And that became my personal definition of happiness. So what I'm actually saying is in regard to your values, it's a part of your, what's called in Adlerian psychology, John kind of dipped into, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but there is this private logic, this relationship with self, and Bree, this is another one of, Bree moves, Bree could like start book clubs and stuff like that, but all of her friends were reading The Courage to be Disliked. And so in Adlerian psychology, it's having the ability to move through your life tasks, not abandon yourself, and you get to define what your experience is instead of it always being handed to you. And that takes work. And once you start defining your values, there is the potentiality that people won't like you. And why? Because you're choosing not to be one with the Borg, if you understand what that expression means. That you're not being a go-by, so that's it. So that's really important. So to have that sense of agency, to define and decide what your values are, and work in such a way with yourself to not allow yourself to get separated from your values, and to use that as a compass. Also at this point, there is this other thing that I like to explain to people, because it's something that came up for me when I reach this particular point. And I call it the hole in the soul. And the hole in the soul is no matter how good you do, no matter how great things turn out, for whatever reason, there's still I'm in a church, so I don't want to use the S word that I like to use, but there's a crap posting aspect of myself that is always saying, it's like Glum in Gulliver's Travels, you'll never make it. There's this aspect of self. So the question is, why is it that the hole in the soul can never be filled? And I'm not asking that rhetorically, I'm asking you all, what would be your guess that the hole in the soul, this negative posting loop, can never be filled?
It doesn't exist.
Huh?
It doesn't exist.
Perfect. You are Tibetan Buddhist. I love that. Woo! That's the answer. Because there is no hole. What most people are writing out, it's the narration of mind about there being an infinite hole that can never be filled, never complete, and you're always just going to show up as broken and damaged goods. But what happens is when we get misaligned from our values and the things that we authentically care about, we can do broken and damaging things. That's very different than being a broken or damaged person. And that is extraordinarily beautiful, that we are basic human goodness, which is a basic aspect or tenet of Buddhism or universal loving presence. That there's never a time or a moment that this infinite beauty is not here. And so this is what this is about. So once we get to step 7, this is about transformation through community. So we embrace humility. So humility can be related to the word hummus, which means of the ground, if we look into it. So this is a state of being grounded. It's a metaphor for not being caught up in the tree limbs of thought and just like hanging around in there. So it also means vulnerability, that you have to take risks. If there is no risk, there is no reward. That's straightforward Maya Angelou when I was growing up. And we also need support, that even like, some people think it's a great tchotchke to drive around in, that I have 30 years of recovery, or Mike's got 20 years of recovery. I'm not sure, Bree, how much you got?
11.
11. So there's you can have significant clean time, but the only problem with significant clean time is reality still shows up the same way, and it doesn't exist us. Oh, that's beautiful. That's a wonderful dance. What song is that?
Straight out of me.
Is that fair?
Could be, or it's Johnny's.
Yeah.
So, but that said, attention deficit disorder. Where was I? What was the last thing I said?
Clean time stuff.
Okay. Eric. High five, invisible. So that said, so the reality is that clean time doesn't equal recovery. Healing equals recovery. Bear. Go Bear. This is my son. Say, hey Bear.
No.
Yes. Okay, and so here's a funny story about Bear and being aligned with values and having a feedback system. Bear, do not punish me for telling the story.
I'll do that afterwards.
Huh? Okay. So we dropped Mom off, and we were headed. I was taking Bear to school, and this was after I bought Bear this bicycle. Great shop on what is it? Beacon Hill. But at any rate, they gave Bear this free water bottle, and like in Seattle, there are driving rules. And so the rules are like every other car, like you're supposed to do the zipper thing. But for whatever reason, this person chose to go around and like break the rule. And I got scared, so my anxiety was up, and I put my foot on the gas, and I went by the person, and I threw the bottle at their car, this water bottle. And Bear says, "You're a Buddhist Buddhist monk. How can you do that? Stop. Meditate. I'm going to tell Genjo. And he was my abbot. He said, I'm going to tell Genjo on you. And so that distorted sense of self, that anxiety self, can show up in any moment. And the most precious thing, now reacting, and Bear may not have understood this at the time, but I actually talked to my sponsor about it. And my sponsor said, well, who was in the car with you? He said, Bear. I said, if it was really just you, would you have cared? No. What is Bear to you? The most precious thing in the world that you care about on a level 10. The only thing I have anxiety about, honestly, truthfully, in a serious way, are my kids and their well-being. So if anything gets in there, it can show up. So the point, the fable of this story, or the moral of the story, is that we only experience true anxiety in the things that we have a sense that we care about. That's where the anxiety or the anger or the frustration or fear comes from. And so a lot of the times we're not seeing that actively, and so we need community. And this is where Sangha is so important, that a distorted sense of self cannot get out of the way of a distorted sense of self. As I said before, I cannot see myself as you're seeing me. And so this is what makes community so important. And so as a part of community, that means vulnerability. That means you have to know what triggers me, what my suffering is. That I have to be, if I'm going to have a sincere and authentic relationship with you, I may have to share some painful stuff from my childhood so that you understand where some of this weird oddity stuff that I can do comes from. And without that sense of intimacy, what do we really have? We're just transacting, and when we're actually designed as human beings to be in transformational relationship. And so one of my biggest mentors in my life, in terms of values alignment and staying aligned with my values, is my son. And we have these conversational relationships. And that's a part of Sangha too, is can I be, like my official title at the monastery is actually Zenji. I don't mention this very often, but I'm sharing this here with you guys. So Zenji actually means Zen master. That, perfect, thank you. Now just go out and do the practice. But despite being in that title, it's just an artificial title. And this comes back to the clean time doesn't equal recovery. Can we be, and Ram Dass talked a lot about this with his own mother, could they just be two humans together, just hanging out and sharing realness? And if I have to be in the position of dad all the time, and I can't be the student to my son, then that's problematic, because my son has real wisdom that I don't always have. You all, Bree, John, Heather, you all don't know, Mike, have authentic wisdom. And if I'm using these artificial titles, that's not a particularly healthy Sangha. And so there has to be this willingness, this humility to lean into equality, so that I can gain your perspective, because I can't, like in the old school recovery way we used to describe it, I cannot always see myself coming. That's a problem. And so since I can't always see myself coming, that means I need you, and I need to invest as deeply and as hard as I can in these relationships. That doesn't mean that we're entangled. That doesn't mean that we're living together. That doesn't mean that I'm going to share my sushi with you when we go out to dinner, maybe tonight. But I will definitely always have a table spot with and for you. And so that's really important. So step 8, and this is the reconciliation. And this is the thing. So what do we have to reconcile? And this is like kind of like balancing the checkbook. So we reflected on those that we had harmed and those who had harmed us. And so there's two sides to this coin. So, and this is very problematic, by the way, for those who do happen to attend 12-step fellowship, where there's this tendency to talk about how I destroyed the world. Okay, fine. But what about things that happened to you? Like there were things like my father was a very unpleasant, fifth a day drinking alcoholic, and some really tough things happened as a kid. And so can I talk about that? And so one time I was with a therapist, his name is Toby Reeves, over in Maryland, and we were talking about some things that happened in the abuse, you know, on a various scale, like by my brother's son. And Toby literally, and something that I said to my mom, and my mom not reporting some of the stuff that happened, and my mom was a therapist, by the way, social worker, very licensed, very credentialed. And Toby said, there's going to be a time that you're going to have to hand the shame back. It's not your shame to carry, but you're carrying it like you own it. And because you're carrying that shame, it is harming and destroying you. And you don't have a path to full freedom. So how do we show up for people? And also, by the way, this gets into this idea of forgiveness and amends. And there are forgiveness meditations, beautiful guided meditations. But that said, so when it comes to this list, who do I have relational tears with? This isn't, I was bad, yada, 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 but this is, what are the tears in the quality of my relationship? Am I like, when I generally ask people, there are three types of relationship status with every person that we know. We're either the student, we're the teacher, or we're equal. And what I invite people to do is to write a short assessment of, write down all the names of all the people that you know or you're in regular contact with, and just write what the nature of that relationship is. And if you have a lot of people who are, you're either their teacher or you're their student, what about if you change the aperture of that relationship? Maybe the point of healing is that you're equals. And what could that look like? And what needs to happen? Because healthy relationship and maturity in relationship is accepting that in our relationships, someone mentioned earlier, is your name Dan? Yeah, Danny. So Danny was talking about this, and there is this, my friend Sebastian, he practices Stoicism and Buddhism together, and he taught me that 2 years ago. So he's having me reading all the things. I'm like, man, I avoided this in high school. But Heraclitus said we cannot step on the same piece of water twice. And so that also means that relationally, something happened between us yesterday that may have caused a relational rupture. Does that rupture have to remain? Are you the same person that you were yesterday? And invite for that. Now, there are people who try to be that consistent. I want to be the same person that I was yesterday. I want to be that same person today. I would invite taking for a test drive, not doing that. Be the person that our values invite us to be in this present moment experience inside these unique experiences. So how I was articulating my values, like my values are the same day to day, but my role today is in the role as a Zen teacher and to flow through that. Where am I at my time? I got 4 minutes? Okay, thank you. So that said, step 9. So this is the relational repair. So when we have ruptures and tears, it's important to mend, not pay restitution. Restitution, because a lot of times when people get to this point, they're like, I stole $20 from you, so I just want to pay it back. Okay, you can pay it back, but what about the trust? And so there was this experience that I had with my own mother. When I was living at the monastery in 1991, my mother came to visit me, and because I was in 12-step recovery, remember there was no refuge recovery, I did my step 9 amends to her, and I said all these things that I felt bad about, and I acknowledged it, and I accepted it. And she said, I hear everything that you're saying, but you were my son, and you really hurt my feelings. And so it wasn't that you stole $20 out of my purse. It wasn't that you relapsed 11 times. It wasn't the 5 incomplete suicide attempts. It's that I'm your mother and you didn't accept my love. And that's when I realized this ain't gonna be a transaction. That I was gonna have to find a way to show up with my mom differently so that I had a sense of trustworthiness with her, a sense of connection with her, a sense of mutual positive regard with her. And from that moment, when I got that awakening and processed through it, as unpleasant as it was, when she transitioned, yeah, I brought her ashes here to Seattle, and I took her ashes to Mount Rainier. And don't tell anyone, and I found out that if you're gonna release ashes on Mount Rainier, you need a permit, okay? So I found that out, and I still was addict shady, and I still found a way to do it. But just saying, see the imperfect monk. This is the part that Bear's always talking about. So that said, but that relational repair, because I did it, I released the ashes in the way that my mom wanted it done. That, and so we were good in that way, and I gave a third to her friend Tully, and a third of her ashes are under a pillar trilogy. So step 10 is consistent maintaining awareness with where we are in terms of our values alignment. And then 11 is this, and this is a Seihoism, so I'm gonna trademark this. This one is mine. I call it the intervention. So a lot of times people call about interventions, like, so this is, and by the way, in psychology, inter means between people, intra means it's coming from the inside. So there's a little nuance. So there's these interventions. So there's something that's coming from this inward relationship with ourself, and establishing and aligning with this universal loving presence nature, which in the Japanese word that they actually use sometimes is Jiko, Jiko, this authentic expression or experience of self. And to have this, and I want to be very clear in what I'm articulating in this, where there's an experience within this intervention that the awareness is literally 360 degrees. The Tibetans sometimes describe this as panoramic awareness. And also, in this 360 degree view, and this is going to sound crazy and hokey, it is not one-dimensional. Like, for those who, are you all aware of like the Tara images? It's like a female, and sometimes it's white Tara, green Tara, red Tara, and things like this. Well, in Tibetan culture, Tara, by the way, the name in their language means liberator. I think this is be Johnny. So they say when Tara stomps her foot on the ground, it penetrates 9 dimensions through 9-dimensional structures. That intervention is coming from that deep within us. And also, and this is what I also like to tell people in consciousness studies and practice, Johnny, is that, and this is something that I invite meditatively, and I'm just going to throw this in because, so now I'm using my Zenji status in ranking. Okay, so if you looked out with the James Webb telescope, and as far out as it goes, it's billions of years. If you're looking through awareness, the inward awareness is also the same distance. Like you think, oh, this is a body, and it's like however wide and however high and all this stuff. But the awareness that is connected to the body is actually infinite. And so we can practice with that, and that goes back into the oceanic nature of consciousness. And then the last piece is just embodied service. And so being, whether it's in Dharma punks or your sanghas or your community, how are we being of service? And this is Robert Greenwood's perspective is servant leadership. That a lot of times, like at the treatment facility, I'm like, one of the things, we had this nurse and she was complaining about where's the housekeeping and yada yada yada, and the housekeeping for whatever they were just not appearing at that time or whatever. Turns out one of their family members had a child, and so they were showing up for that. So what I did was I was cleaning the nurse practitioner's office every day, and I didn't tell her that I was doing it. And then she was complaining about something was not right. I need more. The housekeeping is terrible. And they used my given name. So they said, Jay. They said, Jay's been the one that's been cleaning your office every day, and you're just complaining. Can't you just be grateful that somebody's cleaning your office and putting stuff in there? And she says, no. And I'm like, well, there you are. And you're the certified nurse practitioner. Maybe you need therapy. Okay. And so that's it. And so this brings us to the end of this presentation, and so this part of it before we go into the groups. So that said, I want to take a 5-minute break before we go into the next piece. The next piece is Bree is going to be leading a 30-minute guided meditation, and then after that we're going to do an actual process group together, and we can't film that because that's got to be private, and then we're going to do Mondo after that. So you have a 5-minute break, and then Bree will get set up for meditation.